Hi. Given the ontological argument, which seems to be a favorite today, I think that the real issue is that it's not that God as a possibility is incoherent. It's that a omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent thing is not possible given the existence of evil. Also, sorry, furthermore, you were saying earlier that the greatest possible island or cigarette or whatever is impossible.
Yeah.
But given that you're arguing for objective morality, it seems strange to then say that those qualities are relative. That the quality of the best possible cigarette is impossible since, or the best possible island, I think you said, is impossible since everyone is interpretation. If there is an objective morality, and presumably morality is good,
yes,
then there should be a best possible island, given that there is one set of morality.
Okay, let's talk about that second point first. When you talk about the best possible island, you're not talking about moral properties. Islands aren't good or evil. You're talking there about pleasurability, beauty. Like I say, it can be, how many resort hotels does it have? Does it have pristine beaches? These aren't moral properties. So there's no contradiction at all in my saying that the properties that make for a great island are relative to personal preference. Those aren't moral properties. One could think, for example, of other properties, or other illustrations. What makes, say, for a great house? What makes for a great house? Well, that's going to depend on the personal tastes of the individual living in there. The number of bathrooms, the architecture, the design. Those aren't objective. So we're not talking about moral properties, so there's just no contradiction there. Now, as for the first point about the existence of evil, this is a good question, and I'm sorry since it didn't come up earlier. What you're suggesting is that there is evil in the world, and clearly that's the case, and that evil would be logically incompatible with the existence of an omnipotent, all-good, omniscient being, and therefore it shows that the existence of God is impossible. And that's a good objection. Problem is, I don't think any atheist has ever been able to show that, in fact, the evil in the world is logically incompatible with an all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good being. Atheists have tried to do that for centuries, but there's no formal contradiction between saying an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing, good God exists and evil exists. So since there's no explicit contradiction there, the atheist has to say these are implicitly contradictory. But in that case, he owes us some account of the hidden assumptions that would bring out the implicit contradiction and make it explicit. And the problem is no atheist has ever been able to identify what those hidden assumptions are that would make that contradiction explicit. And so I'm not kidding you here. There are almost no philosophers today who think that God and the evil in the world are logically incompatible with each other. The only one that I can think of would be J. Howard Sobel at the University of Toronto, who still defends this argument. But the vast majority, almost universally, philosophers have now come to agree that there's no logical incompatibility between God and the evil in the world. So that atheists who want to use the problem of evil today always have to resort to a probabilistic version of the argument, where they would say, yeah, there are possible worlds containing God and evil. It's logically possible, but they'll say it's improbable, given the evil in the world, that God exists. And you see, that version of the argument doesn't show that the concept of a maximally great being is then logically incoherent, and therefore doesn't do anything to undercut the ontological argument. Now, how you respond to the probabilistic version of the problem of evil is a whole different subject that we can't talk about now. I deal with it on the website, reasonablefaith.org in certain places, I think that we can show that it's not improbable that a God exists given the evil in the world. Indeed, going back to the moral argument that you mentioned, I think there's actually an argument from evil to the existence of God. And it would go like this. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. 2, evil exists. 3, therefore objective moral values exist. Some things are evil. 4, therefore God exists. So on a superficial level, evil seems to call into question God's existence, but on a deeper level, I think evil actually proves God's existence, because in the absence of God, good and evil as such would not exist. So illustrations of real evil in the world are one of the best ways, I think, to get people to see that objective moral values do exist, and that therefore there has to be a transcendent foundation for them in God.